The sixth is countless frauds. This kind of comes on from that last point. Here's one fraud, Haeckel's embryos. So they were drawn in 1874 by Ernst Haeckel. They were debunked at least by 1997 in Science Journal, perhaps even before then. But they were in my school textbooks, and I've put circa kind of the time that I was at school. So this is almost a decade on from the fact that they've been debunked, yet they're still being used in school textbooks to promote evolution. Why is that? It's because there's nothing better to teach evolution with.
Well, as far as these embryos go, that's not exactly accurate. Haeckel did accentuate some aspects of these embryos. He didn't draw anatomically correct embryos at first. He had since later corrected those drawings, but there are still some textbooks out there that use the drawings that aren't exactly anatomically correct. But given that they aren't necessarily anatomically correct and that they do hyper emphasize some of the common features, they are still accurate in their depiction of evolution and the connection between, the embryo stages of organisms. Now, one of the things I think creationists can't readily explain is why embryos all seem to have the same characteristics. Now, in varying degrees, obviously, because human embryos don't have the exact same kind of tail and everything like that other creatures with actual tails would have in their embryonic stages. But the fact that humans develop with the tail to begin with is something that's a little difficult for creationists to explain, I feel. Also, another thing is that mammals, including humans, they also develop these kind of, not really slits, but there are these folds. And I mean, they're pretty much the outside of a slit. There's only a thin membrane that's preventing it from being an actual slit that in amphibious and aquatic animals would eventually turn into gills. In humans, they end up, disappearing, not turning into gills. They're not functional in any kind of way, but they do start to develop in our embryonic stages. So human embryos have tails, which we don't actually use or have. We start developing gills, but we don't fully develop skills or get gills developed in the same way as aquatic and amphibious animals. These are very hard things for creationists to explain. Why would God create an embryonic stage for humans that includes those particular features if they're not actually used in the final product? Now, on an evolutionary understanding, this makes total sense. But from a God created us perfectly kind of viewpoint, doesn't make a whole lot of fucking sense. But still, his point is that Haeckel's embryos were overemphasized, or they were proven frauds. They weren't actually frauds or fraudulent in the way that, they just don't exist. They were overemphasizing the evolutionary traits that are similar amongst multiple different species of animals. And like I said, Haeckel later came back and fixed his embryonic drawings to better match the anatomy of these embryos and all of these animals. But Haeckel's corrections and the actual anatomy of these embryonic stages, but these corrections don't detract from the evolutionary evidence that's provided by them.
Again, here we've got the evolution of the horse. This is a Britannica encyclopedia. This was last accessed on January the 3rd, 2022. And the first line I've underlined, it says, the evolutionary lineage of the horse is among the best documented of all paleontology. And yet here on the next slide are two quotes predating 2022. One of them from 30 years ago, which is Wadsworth. He says, other examples, including the much repeated gradual evolution of the modern horse, have not held up under close examination. And this one from 1950, many examples commonly cited, such as the evolution of the horse family or the saber-toothed tigers, can readily be shown to have been unintentionally falsified and not to be really orthogenetic. And so basically that's the horse evolution theory doesn't hold up, but Britannica says it's the best evidence. And there's a museum, the Horse Museum in Kentucky, which still teaches the evolution theory of the horse. and yet all of what they're teaching has been falsified or debunked, but it's still there because they have nothing better to replace it with.
All of this is bullshit. The evolution of the horse is understood very well, and we have evidence in the fossil record that shows a gradual progression in the horse lineage. So I get it. This guy found a couple of quotes that seem to support his conclusion here, but just because that he can find a couple of quotes from people that seem to support his position doesn't mean that they either actually support his position or that these people are making some kind of coherent point with whatever kind of quote that he happened to pick. Now, fortunately, I did do a quick bit of Google sleuthing here to find out that the second quote in this is actually a quote mine, as the author, Simpson, spelled like the TV show Simpson, not with a Y, but anyways, Simpson is actually an advocate for evolution. He wants evolution to be taught, or he wanted evolution to be taught in schools. He was very much an advocate for evolution as a scientific theory that explains the diversity of life. And in this particular quote, he was actually arguing that orthogenesis is not a real thing. And orthogenesis has been disproven. Now, if you don't know what orthogenesis is, don't worry. I didn't know either, so I had to look it up real quick. Basically, orthogenesis is this idea that organisms have this innate tendency to evolve in a certain direction for a certain purpose. Like there's some internal mechanism that causes them to evolve in one particular path, as opposed to there being random mutations that happen and organisms adapting to their environment through natural selection and other means. So basically, Simpson wasn't saying that the horse lineage is not scientifically accurate or that evolution can't explain how horses came to be. What he was saying is that horses don't prove orthogenesis, meaning that horses develop through natural selection and not because they have some innate internal driving force that caused them to evolve in the direction that they ended up going. I'm not sure about the other quote that he gave here, but my guess is that if he couldn't get the name of the second quote's author correct, or even what the author was fucking talking about, my guess is that the other one is quote mined as well. I did look up the book, and the book looks like it's a very general science textbook. So my guess is quote mining yet again. Quote mining will never be a convincing argument. Actually understand what these people are saying and then present the full context. Honestly, at this point, I don't know if we can actually trust what this guy is saying. Now, obviously, the previous 5 reasons should have established that, but the fact that he would go as low as to quote mine people and present things out of context like he has is just really shitty. Now, he could have gotten these references from like various creationist websites, because when I plugged in, especially the top quote there, to a search engine, it only pulled up creationist websites that were citing it. So my guess is that he found one of these websites, or when he was researching for this, and he just put this in here without actually checking the context of either of these quotes.